If you've been into guns for a while, you've probably heard that semi-automatic guns that fire from an open bolt are banned, and they're classified by the ATF as machine guns. This is one of the ugliest pieces of FUD lore out there, and it's spread so far that it's even sitting on Wikipedia. Today we're going to talk about this lie, what's behind it, and the truth of the matter. So let's dig into some open bolt business.
While the host of Fuddbusters is a lawyer, he is not your lawyer. If you pay him, maybe, either way you slice it, the video that you are about to watch is not to be construed as legal advice.
You'll see people arguing passionately that open bolt guns are illegal and that the ATF ruled in 1986 or 83 or 82 or some other year Huey Lewis in the News was topping the charts that any such gun is a machine gun. Well, if that were true, why is stuff like this out there? My friend Bryce over at BSD Fabrication hooked me up with this neat Fox carbine, an interesting open bolt semi. It was designed and made in the 60s, and it's also got a fairly substantially different disconnector design to the guns we'll be talking about today. It was never designed as a machine gun, but rather explicitly semi-auto. It's also got a combination lock on the receiver, which I find limitlessly entertaining. When you point out that there's tons of these, not this model, but plenty of similar ones for sale on the secondary market, they'll tell you that, well, the ATF grandfathered them. If you ask these individuals to prove this, they'll either begin to seize or link you to some documents that they haven't read. We'll talk about those documents a little later. Before we go deeper, let's talk for a moment about what an open bolt gun is in the first place. So first off, as a device of comparison, let's look at something that we're more familiar with in terms of self-loading firearms, that being something that fires from a closed bolt and is either hammer or striker fired. Here we have a PB-19 Bison, a very familiar common gun on the US civilian market. It is a direct blowback, simple blowback, hammer-fired closed bolt gun. So if we do the cutaway view, what we can see here is kind of explained, and here's the bolt assembly. In these designs, we start with an empty chamber, a loaded magazine, and to charge the gun, we manually bring back the bolt, the slide, or whatever it is, and release it. So let's take a look at that. At this point, the bolt has stripped around from the magazine, chambered it, and is ready for firing. So the act of loading and chambering the round is something kind of distinct from the firing cycle. It's only meant to fire after this point, right? After the bolt is closed and in battery, hence closed bolt. So again, we've got the bolt forward, loaded from the magazine. Nothing going on now, but then when we fire, it initiates the cycle. And again, secondarily, as a result of the blowback, the bolt comes open and closes. Open bolt firearms are a little different, and to avoid getting too complicated, I'm going to separate them into two main categories. That being fixed firing pin designs and moving pin designs. So here's one of the classic examples of an open bolt subgun, the Sten Mark II. If I do this, you can see how dead simple this design really is. The firing pin is integral to the bolt face. It's machined into it. And this is super common in open bolt subguns and pistol caliber open bolt guns generally. The reason for this is simple. There's no lockup needed on these guns. The weight of the bolt is all that's really needed to safely fire these in a self-loading fashion. So with this design, pulling the trigger simply drops this sear. So let's load it and show it in that position. See, the bolt is retained in the rearward position by this sear. So with this design, pulling the trigger simply drops the sear out of the bolt's path. So the sear is currently holding the bolt in the rearward position, and dropping the sear allows the bolt to travel forward, picking up a round from the magazine, and then the moment it's fully chambered, the round is set off by that firing pin integral to the bolt face. The main distinction here is that operating the trigger both loads and fires the gun in one cycle instead of firing the gun with reloading a secondary function. So here, loading happens as the first part of the firing cycle rather than a secondary part. Something we can see in this design, though, is that because of how simple it is, as long as the sear is down, the weapon is going to continue firing automatically until the sear comes back up to interrupt it. And we can see that here. It's just going to stay firing because, again, the only thing firing the gun is the integral firing pin. There's some other designs that use a cammed firing pin or whatever, but basically whenever that bolt goes forward, firing happens. This gun and many like it were designed and intended to fire automatically. There's no question about it. It does have a semi-auto setting, but the fact that in this gun's design parlance this is often referred to as an interrupter is kind of telling. So let's kick that over. You see here when we engage semi-automatic mode in a Sten, and similarly in a Mac subgun and in some versions of the KG-9, the disconnector simply interrupts the normal firing cycle after each shot. Check it out. So you can see there, when the bolt passed over the disconnector, it interrupted the sear, causing the sear to come back up and stop the bolt path. Likely because these guns were really designed primarily as machine guns, simply removing or altering the disconnector or trip lever or whatever you want to call it in that particular design parlance will result in the gun firing automatically with no problem. And you can see the auto mode literally just moves the disconnector out of the way. Not all open bolt guns have fixed firing pins though, and it becomes a bit more complicated. You see, when we're dealing with cartridges that have a little bit more juicy flavor filling than a pistol round, you need the action to actually lock up before it fires. The reason for this is that, you're dealing with a lot more energy, and if you were just dealing with direct blowback, you'd need a preposterously, ludicrously heavy bolt for it to come back at a safe speed. We're going to look at a couple examples real quick. Here we have the classic venerable Shoshaw, regarded by many as the greatest light machine gun of all time. As you can see here, there is no fixed firing pin, right? There's a fairly normal looking firing pinhole. So we can go to the cutaway. We see that the firing pin is indeed separate from the bolt head. And we also see that this is a rotating bolt, similar to what we're used to on firearms like the Remington Model 8 and all of the other, less inventive guns that are based on it, such as the AR-15 and pretty much everything else. As we see here, when we fire, it will first wait for the bolt to lock closed, and then and only then will the firing pin be allowed to proceed forward and pierce the primer, firing the gun and initiating the firing cycle. The Chatellerault 2429, based largely on the BAR and maybe possibly tangentially related to the Bren, handles it with a separate firing pin actuated by the bolt carrier. Only after the weapon is locked up will it fire. The Breda PG, designed originally as a semi-auto only open bolt rifle, uses this neat little toggle-esque thing with a separate firing pin that can only hit home when the bolt is up and locked. So before we get into the ATF letters and all the related FUD lore, you might be thinking something to yourself. Hey self, why does this matter? Who wants an open bolt semi-gun anyhow? Aren't they, bad and stuff? Well, yes, and no, and yes. Like all things, there are drawbacks as well as advantages. Because of the bolt's forward momentum, some recoil energy will feel canceled out to the shooter, giving a softer shooting experience. Also, because of this, during the firing cycle, the weapon will most certainly jump and wander a bit, but with a gun and operator in good condition, this can be handled more than well enough. Another advantage is the relative simplicity, which could potentially enable designs that are low cost while still safe and effective. Another disadvantage is that fixed firing pin designs can lead to more out-of-battery detonations. Another potential advantage is the greater cooling capacity, allowing you to use more forgiving and, again, inexpensive materials. Plus, when people make semi-automatic versions of older designs and they're converted to a completely different firing mechanism, you lose a lot of the experience related to the old design, and I think that's a loss for our society. Regardless, a gun that's designed and intended to be semi-auto only really shouldn't expose its owner to criminal consequences, in my opinion. So let's talk about the state of the law here. As you know, the prevailing contention is that these firearms are machine guns under the NFA. You'll see people saying that this is because they're too easy to convert, or something. This misses the mark for a couple important reasons. The law defines machine gun as any weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can readily be restored to shoot automatically more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. The important terms here are designed to shoot or can be readily restored to shoot. Remember, the law says restored and not converted. So let's get on to what led us to this whole mess. Again, you hear it online all the time, open bolt guns are banned, blah, blah, blah. People in building circles will tell you that any new design you make must be closed bolt and striker or hammer fired. Occasionally, you'll see someone question this and then get shouted down quite aggressively. Hell, even Wikipedia says, at the time of this recording, that the ATF ruled in 1982 that all semi-automatic open-bolt firearms were machine guns, as they may be readily converted to full auto. So let's check the link Wikipedia has here as a source for this contention. Ah, of course. It goes to an uncategorized pile of ATF rulings. Wonderful. Still, we know the source of this. It's found in ATF rulings 82.2, 82.8, and 83.5. These are rulings related to the KG-9, the SM-1011, and the Yak-Sten. The first of this trilogy came in 1982 regarding old Kellgren's certified classic, the KG-9. In this ruling, ATF expresses the opinion that due to the design of the KG-9, it was designed to shoot automatically and is thus a machine gun. ATF specifically states that the readily restorable definition is for those firearms which previously could shoot automatically, but not in their present condition. Nothing we're talking about is that, as they're made semi from the beginning. Their opinion, which you might justifiably disagree with, is that the design definition includes weapons which have not been machine guns previously, but because of their design, will function automatically by the simple removal or modification of existing parts. As we saw looking at the Sten, the KG-9 disconnector design means that with a simple cutting, filing, grinding, or just removal of the part, the gun runs perfectly as an auto gun. The open bolt characteristic of the gun was not the linchpin of this decision, but rather one factor taking along with a number of other design features that led them to decide that this weapon was designed to shoot automatically. Also remember, as we discussed before, this gun was simply an interrupted version of a fully automatic design, often known as the MP9, and a previous automatic version developed in Sweden before they brought the KG-9 to the US. At the end of this ruling, ATF asserts that it will not be applied to KG-9 pistols which were manufactured before the date of the ruling. Next up, ruling 82.8, which covers the SM-10 and SM-11 open-bolt Mac-style guns. We have the same basic analysis hinging on the disconnector or trip, which are designed in such a way that the simple modification to them, such as cutting, filing, or grinding, allows the firearm to operate automatically. Similarly, the ruling exempts guns made or assembled before its date. Finally, ruling 83.5, which covers Yak's Sten Mark II, which was just a Sten Mark II kit with the selector stuck in semi-auto. The analysis mentions that the design is identical to the original selective fire Sten, but again focuses on the disconnector that is designed so that bending, breaking, or cutting allows the weapon to operate automatically. And remember, it's not the act of modification that's the linchpin here. It's how simple it is to remove or obliterate the part and have it run perfectly as an automatic weapon. There's also the interesting case of the Spitfire carbine, which I know you'll mention in the comments if I don't talk about, which was ruled a machine gun in 1968. The Spitfire would rip full auto if you just manipulated the safety while firing. There wasn't any fuss to that one. They just straight up called it a machine gun since it could rip full auto without any modifications as it was designed. So, on point of discussion, we've got 3 ATF rulings regarding 3 specific semi-auto guns. Nowhere in these rulings does it state that open bolt guns in general are subject to anything. Also note that in these rulings, the phrase open bolt is used a grand total of 5 times, largely in describing the guns, but the word disconnector 9 times. Then, after this period of time, we saw many manufacturers choosing to not fuss with it and giving the market what they wanted anyway, which was closed bolt versions, which were honestly a little bit easier to fire. Between then and now, what we've wound up with in our community is everyone convincing themselves that open bolt automatically equals machine gun, and that there's some magic ruling where ATF says this and that open bolt guns are just banned. Well, what about the myriad other open bolt semi-autos that came and went over the years? Or the pile of designs that were never intended to be automatic? The fact is, they just aren't machine guns, and there is no categorical open bolt ban. It doesn't exist. I'm not saying this means you can just zap together whatever random parts kits you want, stick it in semi, and call it a day. In fact, ATF might have something to say about that. I don't know. Some of these guns function the same as the guns that ATF said were designed to shoot automatically. Others use more clever, harder-to-beat semi-auto modes, similar to ones in more conventional closed-bolt semi-automatic guns. What I do think is that it's possible to design a mechanism that fires from the open bolt with or without a fixed firing pin that would not be considered designed to shoot automatically. Will it be the easiest way to go about this? No. But is it possible? I think so. Starting with the ground up to fire one and only one shot per trigger pull would be the way to go. That's it for today. Let me just say I really appreciate you guys watching and subscribing. It makes a huge difference. If you want to support me more than that, I started up a Patreon and Subscribestar. I've added benefits like a patron-only podcast, a Discord, and surely more to come. This kind of support will help enable me to make more content more regularly, something I'd really love to be able to do. There's also a link to the Fuddbusters sticker and the Magic ATF ball in the description below. Magic ATF ball. Can I do an open bolt semi? Thank you all so much for watching to the end and for your support. I'll see you next time. Or if you become a patron or Subscribestar, I'll see you on the Discord. Remember, the anti-side has been working long and hard, passing laws and trying to make more. We don't need to make up stuff that's stricter than what's actually against us. Anything more than minimum compliance is self-regulation. Y'all take care.
Wow.